Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Jen Tullock to talk all about Severance season two. And one of the things that I think is interesting about the way that I've always heard you speak about Devon is that you've mentioned before that she's always had this very specific purpose within the show of somewhat being the audience's eyes and ears into the story. And I was interested in coming into season two, how you feel like that carried into the story and the narrative playing out in this season.
It was really exciting to be able to broaden her scope a little bit, and that we got to see not only how she shows up for and represents her family, but her own internal experience, her own interior world. I think that in season one, she's there really to sort of orient Mark and his family life and the life that predated his being severed. So this season, it was cool to actually see her own motivation to explore her own friendship with Gemma and her own shortcomings. I think it's easy to, in the first season, see her as this sort of warm, easy eyes and ears for the audience. But this season, we see where she fucks up. She's impatient. She's impulsive. There are times where she's not made the right decision. I think that's very much on display in the scene with the scenes with Ragabi. And I'm only just realizing as I'm talking that you moderated our Q&A at that event, and I just realized it was you. It's so nice to see you again.
Likewise.
I was like, wait, no, that of course. My brain is absolute scrambled eggs right now. So it's nice to see you again. You were amazing. You're an incredible moderator.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was so fun, and that was the event that made me want to reach out and try to set this up. So
Oh,
it's
cool.
perfect. Yeah.
Great.
I mean, I also love with what you were just describing there about, season one was very much seeing her centering the men in her life and trying to
Mm.
be very protective and caring and nurturing towards them. And it just feels like that's completely exploded into something much bigger because it's no longer just about protecting Mark. It's about what is Lumen doing, and this is much bigger than even just the two of us. And so, how do you feel like that widened scope also really changed things for you?
I think it gave her more places to mess up, and that was exciting for me. I think that sometimes even with the best writing, if we only see a character contextualized by another character, it's hard to know necessarily what their actual thoughts and opinions are. And Dan Erickson, I think, is a great writer of our time and does not write a one-dimensional character. So I was very lucky that even in those moments in season one, she was absolutely nuanced and three-dimensional. But this season, even more so. And that was exciting for me to watch her get mad, to watch her get actionable, and to watch her lie to her husband. She's not we all contain multitudes. And I think it was fun to sort of turn the stereotype on its head of this like warm, fun sister everybody wants, but also someone who isn't necessarily thinking straight in all moments and isn't always selfless. I think there are moments with Mark this season where she doesn't show up as her best self. She's short with him and she's impatient. So that was really exciting, and I definitely was grateful to get to finally explore in person the friendship with Gemma, because getting to retroactively play a relationship that had existed only in our minds was so fun, especially for me and Deechin, where we're friends in real life and I love her so much. And the soulfulness that she brings to that character is impossible to ignore. She just looked me in the eyes in that scene and I was a puddle. So yeah, I was grateful to figure out a little bit more who this person is and why she does what she does.
But some of what we ultimately ended up seeing, where we saw Devon and Gemma and Ricken and Mark, came from conversations that you and Dan Erickson had before going into season two, where you were talking about the idea of what these friendships would look like, and even the
Mm,
idea of, I think Mark didn't used to be so short with Ricken when he was happier and not so stressed out and
right.
Seven. And so how did that conversation kind of help to shape some of what we ultimately got to see in that episode?
I think the beauty of Dan's world building is that it is vast, and that means there are often 76 different storylines for any given character that he's sort of playing Tetris with. And as such, we going into season two all had, I think, a couple of different ideas for where each of these characters might go. And he and I just were having a lunch in LA one day, and this was before I'd seen any scripts for the second season. And I said, what do you think is her personal stake here beyond her love for her brother? Like, were they friends? And he said, yeah, I think they were friends. And I said, well, what if they were really close? I mean, like, I like the idea that this foursome could have had a symbiotic dynamic where the sums of the whole of their parts rather worked for them. And then when one of them died, they fell apart, a thread was pulled. And so we kind of worked backwards, and he was like, yeah, let's look at that. I think it would be really heartbreaking to see that maybe there was a past where Mark did understand Ricken, where Ricken was a bit more at ease and not as insecure and verbose, and what that looked like. And so after an entire season and a half of seeing them at odds with one another and seeing that friction, seeing them, in this like beautifully sunbathed warm afternoon together where they felt like a family, was heartbreaking.
And because what you were just describing with Ricken as well, of, maybe he wasn't always so verbose and his emotions felt a little bit different. How
Yeah.
do you feel like that adjusted things ever so slightly in playing those scenes with Ricken and then looking at where they are at this point together in comparison?
I've seen a lot online. Folks have sent me messages, and certainly people in my family and friend group have said, "Why is Devon with Ricken? We don't understand." And I say the same thing every time. We meet any two people in a romantic relationship at a given point in their timeline, and I think back on my own personal relationships, and no 2 days looked the same. And I do think that when you have a tragedy as big as the one that befell this family, it changes people. It changes how they see one another. It changes how they interact. It changes how they move through the world. And I think that there was an ease between them before that, Ricken was always a little bit ridiculous, but I also think his heart is good. And he lets Devon be herself. He celebrates who Devon is. And I think she was probably like a wild gal who dated people of all genders and backpacked all over Europe and dropped out of Oberlin and played rugby and like had a really fun, splashy life. And when she decided, I want to be a mom and I want to be a partner, I want to find someone that lets me be myself and allows me the stability to do so, I think she sees Ricken. And so when we do meet her after everything has fallen apart, I think she's trying to hold on to that, and in probably some ways is lying to herself, because I think her eyes have been opened a bit by all of this in a way that um maybe it's affecting how she sees her own partner.
And in terms of her previous relationships as well, there was also that element of her backstory of, we learn that she is queer and she's
Yeah.
been with women as well. And
Yeah.
I love the way that that played out, because it was something that you had decided right at the beginning with Dan in collaboration of season one. So it had always been part of her identity.
Yeah.
And did you find that this season gave you a lot of opportunities to really look at elements that we hadn't necessarily seen said out loud on screen, but had always been part of her, and to really live in, breathe in those in different ways this season?
That was a funny and unexpected moment. I'm so grateful to Dan because he treats these characters with such care, and he also has, I think, the foresight and humility to say to any people in this cast that maybe haven't shared the same lived experiences as him, what does that look like for you? How would that inform this character? And I saw someone online say, "Oh, of course Devon's queer because the actress who plays her is queer." And while that is very true, that's not why I wanted that to be part of her character. I play plenty of straight people that I love. For her, it made sense. It made sense as far as her backstory. It made sense as far as how she moves through the world. And it also, I think, makes sense for her dynamic with Ricken. I think that there is something specific about people who date all genders that allows an open-mindedness and an ease with people that maybe is less rigid within like heteronormative constraints. And so we, when that line came out, I think it was an ad lib. I just thought it was funny because I remember when we shot, I thought, oh, Devon probably has a little crush on this woman. She's really chic and she's very put together. She's everything Devon isn't. And and I remember when we were shooting it thinking, yeah, I'm gonna kind of play it like a little bit of a crush. And so when we were shooting that episode with Adam, where Devon says, "Oh, the one I kind of had a crush on," I had no idea the internet was gonna catch a blaze the way that it did. And but I was so grateful, and I texted Dan. I said, "Hey, I want to check in with you. Like, we didn't really discuss this recently. I want to make sure I'm having conversations about this aspect for that you feel in on the conversation for." And he was like, "Of course, I love it. Of course she's queer." Like, yes. So it was an accidental outing of Devon, but it was really fun. And it was fun to engage with people online about that, because I do think We're so lucky that we have this beautiful queer representation on the show with Bert and Irving and that gorgeous love story. So, you know what? Maybe Devon was just feeling jealous. She said, "I want to have a little gay, a gay moment." So,
There's also been so much at play with Devon, where again, looking at season 1 and 2 in comparison, season 1 Lumen was this idea of something that was still impacting and affecting her life and her relationship with her brother, but it wasn't on her front door and she
mm,
wasn't meeting any of the people there. And suddenly you have Milchick coming into her home and, her needing to lean on Cobell. And so what were the changes that you found in terms of the way that she was broaching everything with Lumen, not just because she realizes more of what's going on, but just because it's in her home now?
right. I think that any parent, but in particular a person who's just given birth, is experiencing something chemically that um, allows you to flip a car. There's that old saying about how, if a parent sees their child in danger, they could physically lift a car. And I think that that's we're meeting Devon in a moment where she's both exhausted and still breastfeeding this child, and she's left the child at home. There's tension in her marriage, and she's pissed as hell. So I think the combination of those variables makes for a testy person and also a desperate one. I think that I saw a lot of stuff online, and people ask me in person, well, why does Devon trust Cobell? And I said she doesn't. Trust has nothing to do with it. I think in a moment of abject desperation, we don't have the luxury of trust. I think she's just going on the instinct of a mother and the instinct of a person who just created life. I mean, to me, that is such a beautiful metaphor for the argument of the show, which is about what is life, what is consciousness, living under capitalism and an excellence obsessed culture. Why would we have to go to such great lengths to bifurcate our consciousness? And I think she's just brought a person into this world and is certainly thinking about what that world would look like when this kid grows up. So I think she's both fighting for Mark, but she's also fighting for the world she wants to see for her kid.
Yeah, and it's really fun to see the way that it plays out when Milchick does come to their home
Mm,
and she's very much the force in that conversation going head to head with him. And what was the space that you found in that scene with Trammell? Because that's the first time that the two of you are getting to film that. And it's interesting to see how they both kind of broach the power dynamic and trying to be the one in charge of that moment differently.
yeah, I think, physically for Devon, there's the thing I love about her most is that she has kind of a floppy, goofy quality. There's a real freedom in her body, the way that she gesticulates and thinks her thoughts aloud. There's not a lot of filter for her. And so I think it was interesting for me to think, okay, well, we've only seen her in moments of safety, other than the end of season 1, when she thinks her kid's been kidnapped. What does it look like when she's actually threatened? Like, she can't really rest upon those laurels of sort of goofiness and affability because she's terrified. So I was like, I actually think the people I know that are the most amiable and gregarious get really still when they're scared. So I was like, maybe she's of the flight, fight, freeze, or fawn. I think she's a freeze. And so it was important to me to see what it looked like for her to actually experience rage. And I was like, I think it's a very still rage because we've seen her frenetic for the whole season. So to see all of that drain from her body in a way that feels like, whoa, that was fun to explore. And also, Trammell is just so brilliant in that character. It's impossible not to be in a stare down with him because otherwise you'll lose yourself. I mean, he's a terrifying figure, and it's so funny for someone who is that warm and kind in real life to see him step into that leather jacket. It's like, ooh.
I also think there's so much in terms of the strength that we get to see in Devon as a person, but
Mm,
then also getting to feel these moments where she's falling apart a little bit and things feel really frazzled. And what does it look like to be giving so much of yourself to someone when you also need that, but you're not necessarily receiving it?
right.
And what were some of the moments where you really found that to be the case for her?
I think during the first season, I was sort of hesitant to see her impatient in any way because we wanted to set her up as this comforting support for Mark and as sort of the only person advocating for him in the outie world. And so it was important to treat that set up with kid gloves for me, knowing that it may change in the second season. So seeing her be terse with him, seeing her be impatient, snap at him, they have that conflict in the diner scene where she's like, fuck off, man. Like, I have my own experience. And I don't know that that was the right thing to say. I think it was kind of selfish of her to say that, but she's being honest. And so I think getting to see what she looks like when shit hits the fan was something I didn't get to do in the first season. So it was an extra palette to play with for sure.
Also, with the fact you're bringing up that scene in the diner and that moment where she's like, "Hey, I lost family too. You know, Gemma
Yeah,
was family to me," and it feels like she's surprised at Mark's response because he doesn't validate it. He pushes back and is like, "You can't even imagine what I experienced,"
right.
and what was the impact that you felt like that had on Devon to not have that moment validated when she said that?
I think it scared her. I think that she, up until this point, she has maintained a status quo with Mark by being very careful with him. She deflects with humor. She keeps him giggling. She keeps things light. And the few times in the first season, she does tread carefully into talking about Lumen and his own grief experience. It's very gentle. It's, I don't think that forgetting is the same as healing, etc. And I was like, okay, any human being only has that much gas in the tank. So I think by the time she's found out what she does about Gemma, she's like, okay, I don't have time to be for etiquette right now. I need to get to the bottom of this. And so I think when he snaps at her, she's like, right, right. We've sort of punctured the balloon here. And now we're going to move into unknown territory where we don't necessarily agree on how to proceed about this. So I think she feels a little bit alone for a lot of the season because of that.
And with Ricken, it's so funny to see how he responds to learning that he's kind of this hero figure to
Yeah.
all of the innies at Lumen, and it definitely bolsters him up a lot. And how did you find the ways that you wanted Devon to respond to, that side of the ego that we suddenly see in Ricken?
I think there's still an element of her that finds it funny because uh, she does know herself very well. And I think because of that, she's not threatened by other people's egos. So I think Ricken's relationship with his own work and his and the grandiosity around it is almost endearing to her until this point. But when he, is when Lumen gets to him and she sees it in that scene with Ricken and Natalie, that's when I think something shifts. And she goes, "Oh, you have no backbone. Oh, right." And sometimes, we make these realizations about our partners years into a relationship. And I think it was interesting to see her having told herself a story about her marriage. And in that moment going, oh, right. Everything I thought to be true about my family is starting to crumble. And what the hell does that look like moving forward?
I also love the scene in the kitchen where it's Devon and Mark and they're trying to problem solve and figure out what they're going to do. And Ricken's there just interjecting and they don't even miss a beat in that conversation until he finally has, a suggestion of like the nickname they should give Cobell.
Yes.
Did you
I
find that, like the script gave you all that the rhythm of what that needed to feel like very easily?
Definitely. Dan knows these characters so well at this point that I think that what's on the page is already so musical and meticulous. But I will say that I appreciate that they have given us a little bit of a runway to improvise a little, especially me and Adam when they just wanted us to squabble. They sort of just let us go. And Michael Chernus, who plays Ricken, it's just one of the greats. I think that the order he has on that show is a tall order, and he makes it look easy because he's so brilliant. But he has to sort of exist as his own monolith, and like I imagine that can be sometimes like isolating because Adam and I are getting to sort of just dig into the stuff that feels grounded and real, and his character isn't that. And so being able to make Rickon still feel like a person and make all of that absurdity feel grounded in something human, I think is a really impressive thing that he does. But yeah, he was just there with that baby, holding that baby while we snapped at each other.
And you're just mentioning the space to improv sometimes. And I love that the director of the episode where Mark collapses in front of Devon, that you were given that space and essentially told, just say whatever you feel, you know, whatever comes to you in that moment. And how did it really help you in that scene just to be able to play from such a raw emotional space of responding?
I lost it. Like I was unwell. I think, when the writing is that good, it does, if you're lucky, let you just live in the scene and think as the character, and then you kind of hope that your body responds in the way that it needs to. And seeing Adam foaming at the mouth and seizing was, my body just responded, and it was he did an incredible job. It was really hard to watch. And I think that I love that they have nicknames for each other, and that speaks to the sort of fraternal intimacy between them. And I call my real brother Buddy, and I had started saying that to Mark because I was like, oh, this is a nice one that doesn't feel condescending. It feels really fraternal. So we'd call each other my lord, my lady, but I'd call him Buddy a couple times. And I remember, I think they kept that take, and I'm calling him Buddy and trying to calm him down. But there's something really heartbreaking about knowing also that their parents aren't alive. And so that even though Devon's a couple years younger than Mark, she is in many ways also a mother to him. And so that now I have a child in my life. I'm a step parent, and so it's impossible not to see a person who is vulnerable as a child. And so that was, yes, it was very sad.
I've also heard you say, like, in this season, you feel like there was Devon before the reintegration procedure and Devon afterwards. What were the changes that you immediately felt it creating once that happened?
I think she lost her desire to please people. I think there was a concerted effort on her part to keep everyone laughing and to keep it light. And she feels comfortable in that role. I think it gives her purpose. I think when she got to the point where she realized that wasn't going to cut it, um, finding a stillness and an anger in her was important for me, because I'm fascinated by how our bodies move differently when we are in peril and safe. And I know, when I feel threatened or scared, I certainly look like a different person than I do when I'm comfortable. So I was like, what does that mean for her? And I think she just got really mad. And I don't think we planned it that way. It kind of just showed up in her body, where those moments where she's looking at Cobell or she's looking at Milchick, it's just seething rage. And she hadn't been allowing herself to feel that in season one. And all of a sudden, grenades are exploding all around her. And I think she's just like, fuck this. Yeah.
And when it is Cobell and it's that seething rage, like you said, I love that the writing allows for more of a minimalistic element in that moment.
Yeah.
And how did you find that allowed you to really play on the undercurrent of tension with Patricia in that moment?
I loved it. I mean, we were that scene where they meet in that snowy clearing felt very literal, because we weren't together with Patricia. She was off in her picture car and we were in ours. So the first time we shot the wide of us looking at each other, it felt, yeah, I could hear the score in my head. It felt ominous. And we're on a cliff, a literal cliff, and it felt very indicative of what those characters are experiencing in that moment, like they're about to jump off. But it was, yeah, I think she's both exhausted at that moment, but also has nothing to say to this woman. So it's just on her face. And so that was fun to play.
It also feels like as Devon's navigating through all of this for Mark, that we kind of really see the way that her love language is action for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And what were a lot of the actions that you found to be really important of the way that she's using that to express it? Because she's really kind of pragmatic and problem solving for him as a way of expressing her love.
It's interesting because though she had tried to hold everyone together with humor and warmth in the first season, I think once she realizes this plan is going through and that she may be the only one that can actually facilitate it with Cobell's help, I think she gets really, her focus really narrows. Even in the scene in the car between Devon and Mark, where they're joking with each other, and she says, "Oh, the wind is whistling over the hole in the back of your head." I think she's still, there is an intensity to her at that moment that is not falling away. I think she's like, you know what? I'm going to keep us focused. Cobell has this way of speaking that's actually not dissimilar to Ricken. Everything is very intense and languid. And I think because of that, Devon's like, okay, time is of the essence. You tell me what we're doing. How do we get there? Stop yelling at each other. And it's like she's babysitting two children, basically, two very smart children, but children.
One of my favorite moments as well is the fact that the two of them kind of then have to come together while Mark's innie and outie is communicating with himself and recording all of the video messages back and forth, which he does for such a long time. In your mind, what do you imagine Devon and Cobell are doing or talking about, or do you think they would just sit in silence with each other during that whole time?
There actually, I think we shot a scene. I don't remember if we shot it or if it was just originally scripted, but there was just a brief cut to them sitting downstairs, awkwardly looking at each other. And I imagine that's exactly what they were doing. Devon's certainly not laboring under any delusions that this woman is going to be an ally. I mean, she's a collaborator, but Devon hates her. So I think it's one of those situations where, you've got to go to a meeting with a coworker you loathe, and it's like, but still got to go to the meeting. So, it was interesting. And also those moments upstairs when the three of them are together and Cobell is, delivering these intense monologues, and she's like, I need to speak to him alone. And Devon is sort of like, okay. Because Devon isn't accustomed to these Lumen people speaking this way. She lives in a world other than Ricken that I think is kind of more to the point. So, and God, Patricia Arquette, can we just like, I can watch her do anything. I just think that we've never seen her play two of the same characters, and they're all so lived in and real. I sometimes had to remind myself to stay present in the scene, because if we weren't on my coverage, I would just be watching her. And she's so fascinating what she does with the physicality of that character. And it's funny, the wintry element of the show means that everyone's in like Uggs and wools. So it turns into this strange, like, fun house version of the real world where everyone just looks like colder versions of themselves. But yeah, that was one of the highlights of this season, and why I couldn't talk about my storyline until these later episodes was because so many of my scenes were with her. I was like, I got to do a bunch of stuff with Patricia, so that was a gift.
Even just the way she says Mark, I could watch that 1,000 times.
Hello, Mark. I heard Kristen Bell was on Ben and Adam's podcast, she and Dax Shepard. And when I tell you that is the most uncanny impersonation I've ever heard, her, Patricia as Cobell, do yourself a favor, give it a Google. It is, I couldn't tell them apart. It was crazy.
I'm Googling it immediately after.
It's so good.
I also, with everything that you describe in terms of like Devon's lightness and her sense of humor and the way that, it's this warmth to her, but it's also this deflection and the way that she expresses anger. I've heard you describing previously how one of the challenges this season was, especially when the show goes into more ominous places and darker places, to make sure to retain it and pull it back, because you didn't feel like Devon's someone who really shift changes and would become different. And so how did you approach that once you realized that was one of the challenges for you?
Totally. I mean, I appreciate that question. I think it's inevitable that we are always, if you're in the practice of mimicry, it's impossible that your body doesn't want to snap to the tone of what's around you. I think that's natural as human beings and certainly as actors. So it was important for me to remember that even if the dialogue around Devon felt elevated and ominous and looming, that she doesn't show up that way necessarily. So even if it felt tonally unnatural to hear a poetic, intense, sort of Faustian line from Cobell, that Devon's response is not going to be in kind. Devon's response is going to be like, whatever, dude, because that's who she is. So it was, it was hard not to want to go there, when everyone around you is speaking that way. So that was a fun challenge.
I love it. Well, I'm so glad that we were able to talk about all of your episodes and amazing scenes. And thank you so much, Jen. It
was great to talk to you, and good to see you again.